Welcome in the class. As you know, our today's topic is very unique, very different, but very interesting and very important. South Africa's Truth and Reconciliation Commission (TRC). It is particularly important in our national perspective. Here, sometimes you might have heard the voices and demands for establishment of such a commission. So, I thought we should study it in detail so that we understand its dynamics, its impact, its significance for the promotion of a democratic culture in our country and in this region. So, our discussion is based on a journal article written by Martha Mino. She is a professor of law at Harvard Law School, and the title of the article is Between Vengeance and Forgiveness. It was published in Negotiation Journal in October 1998. So, Martha Mino says South Africans are facing their painful past through a new national effort called the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, or TRC. South Africans are facing their painful past through a national commission effort. So it is also related to their past, painful past. This commission has already heard thousands of stories. The stories are about murders, torture, and other abuses from the apartheid era. Apartheid era it refers to the period during which the majority of blacks was ruled by minority white minority in South Africa, and it was characterized by systemized systemic oppression and injustice against the blacks of South Africa. Many of the stories are even shown on television. The TRC is built on South Africa's constitutional value of Ubuntu. Ubuntu. It is a value, constitutional value in South Africa. It provides the foundation for the establishment of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Ubuntu is an African idea. Ubuntu means humanity, kindness, and shared community. People accused of crimes can get amnesty, but only if they meet certain conditions. People accused of crimes can get amnesty, but they can get amnesty only if they meet certain conditions. So, amnesty is not blanket, it is not absolute. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission tries to restore dignity to victims. It also tries to help people heal. And the TRC tries to bring a divided nation together. Dignity to victims. It tries to restore dignity to victims. So the victims who suffered at the hands of the minority government, they did not have any chance to to lessen their suffering. So when they find an opportunity to tell their story, so it brings some dignity to them. It was argued, and it also helps them heal, heal their suffering, heal their wounds. And There was a sharp division in South Africa. So this commission was launched, it was established to bring some unity in the nation. How it all started, how did it evolve? Nelson Mandela, after being in prison for 27 years, helped bring an end to apartheid peacefully. During the peace talks, one big question came up: how should the new government deal with all the crimes of apartheid? The old rulers wanted amnesty, freedom from punishment. Amnesty means freedom from punishment. The old rulers wanted amnesty as a condition for handing over power peacefully. The old rulers wanted amnesty as a condition for handing over power peacefully. Uh, to hand over the power to the blacks majority. The interim constitution that followed became a bridge from the divided past to a new democratic future. The interim constitution that followed became a bridge from the divided past to a new democratic future. It specifically mentioned Ubuntu and called for a fair process to free people from prosecution for politically motivated crimes. So, in the interim constitution, the South African idea of Ubuntu, it was utilized, and it called for a fair process to free people from prosecution for politically motivated crimes. Prosecution means when the government officials carry out judicial uh, process against an offender. It is called prosecution. Birth of the TRC, Truth and Reconciliation Commission. The African National Congress, ANC, led by Mandela, wanted a truth commission. So it was the political party, African National Congress, ANC. Its leader was Nelson Mandela. So this Mandela's party wanted a commission. Truth commission means an official way to investigate the truth about past torture and killings. What does truth commission mean? It means an official way to investigate the truth about past torture and killings. The African National Congress had already investigated human rights abuses within its own camps in Angola. Because it was a rebel movement against the government, it had its own camps at various locations, and its own workers, its guerrillas, they had used torture against their enemies. So the African National Congress had already investigated human rights abuses within its own camps in Angola. They believed, the African National Congress believed, that facing their own wrongs showed commitment to human rights and new moral values, unlike those of the apartheid. The leaders of the apartheid, they were oppressors. They did not believe in justice and any morality. But unlike them, the workers, the members of the African National Congress, they held accountability of their own wrongdoings during their freedom movement. And this way, they showed commitment to human rights and new moral values. African National Congress leaders felt that a National Truth Commission would honor the victims. The Truth Commission would honor the victims, and the Truth Commission would reveal what really happened during apartheid. Because many of the crimes were secret, and the victims did not have the opportunity to share what happened to them. And the oppressors obviously they would not like to publish to their crimes, to bring their crimes to the fore. So the African National Congress, they felt that a commission national truth commission would reveal what really happened during apartheid in South Africa. The National Party was the only ruling party, was the old ruling party. The ANC was the new ruling party, and the National Party was the old ruling party. They were the whites. The National Party wanted a reconciliation commission. They mainly cared about amnesty for their people. Although they wanted a reconciliation commission, but they also wanted amnesty for their people. A new beginning. In the early 1990s, a settlement was reached between all sides. On April 27, 2004, South Africa held its first free democratic election. So, first free elections were held in April 1994. The world watched as people of all races, including whites and blacks, waited in long, joyful lines to vote. The interim constitution of 1993 was adopted. It described itself as a bridge from the past to a future of human rights, a future of democracy, and a future of peace. It also directed Parliament to create a law allowing amnesty for actions linked to political objectives from the conflicts of the past. So the 1993 Constitution of South Africa directed the Parliament to create a law which would allow amnesty for actions which were linked to political objectives from the conflicts of the past. The TRC is formed. On July 1995, Parliament of South Africa officially created the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, TRC. It had three committees. The first committee was the Human Rights Violations Committee, the second was the Amnesty Committee, and the third was the Reparation and Rehabilitation Committee. So the Truth and Reconciliation Commission had these three committees. The TRC was established after extensive consultations with many groups and extensive consultation with many communities. It was different from other truth commissions around the world because it was created through democratic legislation. This truth commission was different from commissions in the other parts of the world because it was created through democratic legislation. The parliament, the African parliament, created this. It involved wide public debate, and it also involved wide public participation in its design. Other examples of truth commissions around the world. In El Salvador, a truth commission was created as part of UN sponsored peace talks. A truth commission in El Salvador was created as part of United Nations sponsored peace talks. In Argentina, the commission came from a presidential order. In Rwanda, international and local human rights groups tried to form a short lived truth commission. International and local human rights groups tried to form a short lived truth commission. Mandela himself had earlier appointed two commissions to investigate torture in ANC camps. Nelson Mandela himself had earlier appointed two commissions to investigate torture in African National Congress ANC camps. In Brazil, a private project supported by the Catholic Church secretly copied and studied a million pages of military trial records. In Brazil, a private project like the Truth Commission, it was supported by the Catholic Church. And this project secretly copied and studied a million pages of military trial records in Brazil. The result was a 12-volume report and a famous book called Brazil Never Again. So this it was a huge report consisting of 12 volumes, and a book was published as a result of this commission, its findings. The title of the book was Brazil Never Again. The book revealed hundreds of murders and thousands of torture cases in Brazil. The book's huge impact led Brazil to sign the UN Convention Against Torture. Religion, debate, and forgiveness. After apartheid ended, South African leaders and scholars studied all these earlier truth commissions. When apartheid ended, leaders of South Africa and scholars of South Africa they studied all these earlier truth commissions in the world. Some people worried about the growing religious influence in the process. Professor Andre Dutoit said that as churches got more involved, religious ideas of forgiveness began to overshadow political and human rights concerns. So the priests, when they got more involved in this process, they were preaching for forgiveness. So Professor Andre Dutoit said uh, this focus on forgiveness began to overshadow political concerns and human rights concerns. Still, South Africa's Justice Minister Dullah Umar said that public debate made the TRC legitimate and fair. Public debate made the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of South Africa legitimate and fair. He emphasized the importance of compromise. He emphasized the importance of justice principles, and the Professor Andre Dutoit emphasized the international law in shaping the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Leaders like Mandela and Archbishop Desmond Tutu set a moral tone of forgiveness and reconciliation. The black majority now had voting rights. It means during the apartheid, the black majority did not have voting rights. But white South Africans still controlled most of the economic resources. So unity was crucial. The idea behind the TRC. South Africans agreed that to truly unite and reconcile, they needed the whole truth about human rights violations. The people of South Africa, they agreed that in order to truly unite and reconcile the nation, South Africans needed the whole truth about human rights violations during the apartheid. The truth must be officially investigated in a fair way. The people wanted. The people of South Africa wanted that the truth must be officially investigated in a fair way, and the truth must be fully acknowledged by the perpetrators who committed the crimes, and the truth must be shared publicly, naming both victims and offenders. So the truth should be open. It should mention the names of the victims as well as the offenders. Amnesty was seen as a necessary price for a peaceful transition to democracy. Amnesty. It was conditional. The amnesty was conditional. It was not absolute. Only those who applied individually for amnesty and only those who fully disclosed their crimes for political could get amnesty. The idea is truth for amnesty. The idea was to trade truth for amnesty and amnesty for truth, helping society move toward a strong democratic. So this way, the South African society could move toward a strong democratic future. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission didn't stop people from seeking truth. It actually encouraged it. The TRC actually encouraged seeking the truth that happened. It helped collect facts and personal accounts that were otherwise hidden or that were otherwise destroyed. So the official records were hidden, mainly hidden, and they were under the control of the government officials. So the public did not have access to these official records, but the victims and the perpetrators, they could come to the Conciliation Commission and they could speak up. They could tell themselves what happened. The outgoing apartheid rulers had destroyed many records, so this was the only way to recover the truth. Purpose and structure of the TRC. The goals. The TRC had several goals. Find out what really happened That was the basic goal, to find out what really happened during apartheid. Another goal was help the public and government officials face the truth. The TRC wanted to help the public and government officials face the truth. Another goal was use amnesty as a tool to make people come forward. So when the officials who had committed crimes, they knew they could get amnesty, so now they were willing to speak the truth, to confess that done they have committed crimes, recommend compensation and steps for healing. It was another goal of the TRC. Recommend compensation and steps for healing. The TRC wanted to show the painful past. It was another goal of the TRC. Show that the new government accepted the painful past, strengthen trust in democracy. The TRSO, it was also one of the goals of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of South Africa to strengthen trust in democracy. Another goal was build a society that respects human rights. That respects human rights. These goals could only succeed if the government actually took action on the TRC's recommendations. So the government had to honor the decisions of the TRC. Second best or something better. The TRC option, was it the second best option or was it something better? Some people ask the question, is the TRC a weak substitute for real trials, or is it a new, better way to deal with crimes of the past? Trials, uh, in other words, prosecutions, are often seen as the best way to handle human rights crimes. Trials, court cases, court cases and punishments are often seen as the best way to handle human rights crimes. Trials punish the guilty and show that no one is above the law. So the trials are based on providing justice and revenge. They can also help stop future violations. So punishments deter other people so that they do not commit the same crimes under fear of punishment. So trials, prosecutions can also help stop future violations of human rights. But trials are hard to hold after big conflicts because there may not be enough money or skilled lawyers. So, a strong independent judiciary is required, advocates are required, and it also involves money. Prosecutors are required. So, trials are hard to hold after big conflicts because number one, there may not be enough money and there may not be enough skilled lawyers, and it may also be hard because the government may be too weak or the government may be afraid to prosecute powerful people. So it has challenges. Problems with trials. Trials can be very stressful and trials can be expensive. Victims have to go through painful cross examinations. So victims also suffer when they go through the procedure, when they go through the go through the judicial process. They rarely get to tell their story fully or emotionally. Yes, when the trials are in procedure, when the prosecution is going on, the focus is not on the victims, the focus is on the offenders, on the perpetrators who should be punished. So the victims rarely find an opportunity to tell their story fully, or they cannot express their emotions. They cannot tell in detail what happened to them and how did they suffer. The victims can't explain what the suffering really felt like. A trial focuses only on proving guilt. A trial focuses only on proving guilt. It does not focus on the full story of a nation's trauma. Trials do not focus on the full story of a nation's trauma. Why truth commissions can work better? Truth commissions, like the TRC, let victims tell their stories in full. So, when the victims attend the sessions, they can tell their stories in detail. They gave a public space to speak. The Truth and Reconciliation Commissions, they provide a public space to the victims to speak, and they provide the space to be believed and to be respected. So it is also one of the basic spirits and goals of such commissions to respect the victims, to believe the victims what they say, what they tell. They aim to record everything, not just one person's guilt. In court cases, only guilt is recorded, and in reconciliation commissions, the whole story is recorded. They can release hidden facts. When people are offered conditional amnesty in South Africa, this meant people who confessed could get amnesty. So, confessions could bring amnesty to someone. Confess means to acknowledge that I have committed this crime. It is called confession. Those who didn't could those who didn't confess could still be prosecuted. So they could be punished. They could be tried in court who did not acknowledge their offenses. The TRC could reject amnesty applications if the crimes were too cruel. If the crimes committed were too cruel, the Truth Commission could reject the amnesty applications. It could also reject the applications if the acts were not truly political. If someone had committed uh, crimes at the personal level for personal reasons, he could not be provided amnesty. She could be tried. He could be punished. Building a national record. The TRC worked like a historian for the whole country. It connected the stories of victims, it connected the stories of offenders and events into one national account. Trials only look at one case. The TRC looked at the bigger picture. This made the TRC's work more complete, though not perfect. It had limited time, only 2 years. It had limited money, so it couldn't do everything. Focus on victims. The TRC focused strongly on victims. even those forgotten by history. The TRC emphasized healing, it emphasized reconciliation. TV and radio broadcasted the hearings, TV and radio showed real human pain. Many victims said they wanted acknowledgement more than punishment. Many victims wanted acknowledgement more than punishment to the offenders. The Human Rights Committee listened to survivors and families and told them, "You were right. What happened was wrong." So, the it was part of the healing process. The Human Rights Committee listened to survivors of the atrocities. It also listened to the families of the survivors, and they were told, "You were right. What happened to you was wrong." Structure of the TRC committees. There are three committees. Human Rights Violations Committee heard victims' stories. Amnesty Committee handled applications for amnesty. Reparations Committee suggested how to compensate and support victims. The Human Rights Committee began first and quickly shaped how the TRC was viewed by the public. Victims could speak, victims could cry, and victims could share without being doubted. Victims could share without being blamed. Amnesty and reparations. People who wanted amnesty had 12 months to apply. They could apply for amnesty in 12 months. Victims had to wait much longer for reparations, or victims had to wait for government support. Some critics said killers walk free, but victims are still waiting. So it was also criticized. Criticisms were also present. Others said, some other critics said, the act of testifying itself gave victims emotional relief and dignity. Others, no, some they were supporters. The supporters of this commission, they said the act of testifying itself gave victims emotional relief and dignity. Healing through speaking. Victims often said that telling their story helped them feel lighter. So when they told their story, they felt lighter. Speaking out made their pain less lonely. It helped them understand that their suffering was not their fault. It was caused by a system of oppression. They could understand that their suffering was caused by a system of oppression in the apartheid. Being heard publicly was powerful. Being heard publicly was powerful, especially when the whole nation was listening through media. For many, it was not about revenge, it was about being recognized as human again. Healing through testimony and inquiry. The main idea behind a truth commission is healing, not just punishment. The belief is when victims and even perpetrators share their stories publicly, healing can begin. I repeat, The belief is when victims and even perpetrators share their stories publicly, healing can begin. The TRC's goal was to create a fair and detailed record of what happened during apartheid. It was one of the goals of the commission to create a fair and detailed record of what happened during apartheid. By helping people tell their stories and by having the government officially acknowledge them, the TRC aimed to help the whole country heal. The TRC hoped that its final report would give South Africa a structure to deal with its painful past. The belief was telling and hearing truth. The belief was telling and hearing truth can heal both individuals and nations. Testimony as therapy. Journalist Tina Rosenberg compared truth commissions to therapy. She said both try to help people with trauma. Therapy as well as commissions both try to help people with trauma by letting them talk about their pain. In both cases, people need someone who listens seriously and validates their story. Psychotherapy. Victims have to reconnect the painful event with their full life story. Reconnect the painful event with their full life story so it makes sense in their minds. She added, if a whole country is traumatized, then the entire country needs this kind of process. But some disagree. Some people think remembering too much can hurt instead of help. They say individuals or nations can have too much memory. Maybe the problem isn't memory itself, but the wrong kind of memory. Shallow memory or stuck in the past. It can be wrong kind of memory. Or maybe it's when truth looks only backward and doesn't build a bridge to the future. Writer Lawrence Weschler quoted a poem, Unchopping a Tree. Unchopping a Tree. It describes how impossible it is to put a tree back together after it's been destroyed. When a tree has been cut into parts, small parts, it cannot be put together again. It when it has been chopped, it cannot be unchopped. The poem warns truth telling alone can't bring back what is lost. Truth telling alone can't bring back what is lost. It is the message of that poem, Unchopping the Tree. You can rebuild the pieces of the tree, but the leaves remain dead. The remains will not get green again. For those who suffered, for those who died, healing may sound meaningless. Healing is meaningless for those who died, those who suffered. Some survivors feel they died inside too. Some of the survivors who are alive, they feel they have been died inside. They are facing internal death. Their past is so painful. They are not able to enjoy the life. So maybe the best they can hope for is endurance, not complete healing. Limits of truth. The problem isn't too much truth, it's that truth can never be complete enough. The problem is that truth can never be complete enough. Real events can be seen in totally opposite ways. Real events sometimes they look like truth and sometimes they look like untruth, and some people may see a single event, some may see it as a truth and some others may see it as untruth. Example: one side may say the war in Sarajevo was an attack on civilians. The other side may call it self defense. It cannot be both at once. This shows that truth can be very hard to agree on. Different roles, different feelings. Victims, perpetrators, and bystanders all relate to the truth in different ways. Each group experiences and understands trauma differently. Studying the effects of the TRC on all these groups is almost impossible. Each group experiences and understands trauma differently. Studying the effects of the TRC on all these groups is almost impossible. Some people were all three things at once. All three things at once. A young person sees his parents harassed by secret police. He joins the resistance group and is later tortured. After that, he becomes violent too, attacking civilians. Others become informants after being tortured. Such people struggle to confess honestly because they were both victims and perpetrators. It's hard for them to forgive themselves or explain what they did. It's hard for them to explain what they did. Healing versus justice. Talking about healing often replaces talk about justice. Talking about healing often replaces talk about justice. Healing uses the language of health, not law. Healing uses the language of health. Healing does not use the language of law. I need water. I need water. Justice becomes part of healing when it helps victims recover and when groups reconcile. Justice becomes part of healing when it helps victims recover and when groups reconcile. But sometimes justice, like trials or punishment, can reopen old wounds instead of healing them. Sometimes justice can reopen old wounds instead of healing them. Healing and justice can work together if the nation is rebuilding under democratic and fair conditions. Healing and justice can work together if the nation is rebuilding under democratic and fair conditions. But they clash. Healing and justice clash when the victimized group has been destroyed, when the victimized group has been expelled, or when the victimized group has been silenced, then justice and healing can clash. Emotional healing and the law. The language of emotions and healing doesn't fit easily with legal systems. Legal systems usually legal systems usually focus on evidence and punishment. They usually do not focus on emotional recovery. After the Holocaust, for example, early responses were about law and justice. The early responses were not about therapy. But over the 20th century, psychology became more important in public life. Survivors and their families began emphasizing the need to heal, not just punish. Healing after violence. Many scholars and therapists have studied how people and societies can heal after collective violence. Eric Santner studied trauma after the Holocaust and Nazi era. Trauma overwhelms the human mind. Victims have to rebuild the way they make sense of the world. Victims of trauma have to rebuild the way they make sense of the world. They must redefine themselves and their boundaries. Real healing means rebuilding both personal and social identity. Robert J. Lifton said victims must rebuild their lifeline. They must create new inner meanings that include their trauma. Judith Herman developed a theory connecting trauma from wars, abuse, and oppression. She said trauma first destroys a person's sense of safety and morality. Judith Herman says trauma first destroys a person's sense of safety and morality. Then it destroys the will to live. Trauma destroys the will to live. Many people do not want to live anymore after huge trauma, after huge suffering. Long term fear and terror cause emotional breakdown and hopelessness. Survivors often have flashbacks, anger, and trouble trusting others. Survivors of trauma often have flashbacks, anger, and trouble trusting others. They find it difficult to trust others because they have suffered a lot. Herman explained that both individuals and societies can go into denial. They repress painful memories. They dream of revenge as part of recovery. But true healing requires remembering, not forgetting. True healing requires remembering the suffering, not forgetting. Steps toward healing. Survivors must talk about what happened. Hiding it makes things worse. Hiding what happened makes things worse. So the survivors must talk about what happened. Survivors cannot go back to who they were before. Survivors must accept their pain as part of who they are now. Healing means facing the truth. Healing means mourning the loss. Healing means taking positive action. And healing means reconnecting with others. The two key parts of healing are empowerment and reconnection. Empowerment refers to feeling in control again, and reconnection refers to feeling part of a community again. These are two key parts of healing: empowerment and reconnection. Helping others or working to prevent future violence gives survivors purpose and hope. Helping others or working to prevent future violence gives survivors purpose and hope. Healing in a political context, it's still uncertain how these psychological ideas apply. Truth commissions are not therapy sessions, but they can borrow from therapy. Survivors may heal partly through political and social action, not only counseling. However, in a public setting like the TRC, it's harder to build a deep, trusting emotional relationship. In a public setting like the TRC, it is harder to build a deep, trusting emotional relationship. Important questions remain. Can political movements also heal trauma? Should helpers use the language of justice when supporting victims? Helpers, like commissioners, should helpers use the language of justice when supporting victims? Power of truth telling. Therapist Judith Herman said, healing starts with telling the truth. Healing starts with telling the truth. The same idea shaped the TRC. Victims were encouraged to tell their stories, not to get revenge. In the TRC, victims were encouraged to tell their stories. They were encouraged not to get revenge, but to be heard and acknowledged. They were encouraged to be heard and they were encouraged to be acknowledged. The belief was truth frees people. Truth frees people. Exposing painful secrets helps sick societies recover. Exposing painful secrets helps sick societies recover. Many therapists have seen how survivors start healing when they talk openly about trauma. Many therapists have seen how survivors start healing when they talk openly about trauma. Keeping silent keeps them sick. Telling the story helps them take back dignity and self respect. The restorative power of truth telling. Psychologist Judith Herman said something very important. She said the whole idea of therapy is based on one belief. And what is that belief? Telling the truth heals. It is the belief on which the whole idea of therapy is based. The goal isn't to get rid of demons, but to get acknowledgement. The goal of therapy is not to get rid of demons, the goal of therapy is to get acknowledgement. Turning personal pain into public testimony brings relief. The belief is simple but powerful. Know the truth and it will set you free. Know the truth and it will set you free. Expose the secrets of sick society and it will begin to heal. expose the secrets of a sick society, and it will begin to heal. Some people wonder, is this really true? Or is it just faith? There isn't complete proof. But many real life stories show that talking about trauma helps. Testimony as healing. Inger Eger and Soren Jensen are two therapists. Inger Eger and Soren Jensen are two therapists. They worked with refugees. They said giving testimony, whether privately or publicly, helps healing. They said giving testimony helps healing, whether privately or publicly. Private testimony means like confession, and public testimony means like in court. Richard Mollica, another expert, explained, when victims tell their stories, shame turns into dignity. So someone is on the door, so I have to check because no one else is at home. Just please, few seconds. Wait for a few seconds. कोई बात नहीं, मेरी क्लास हो रही है.
एक ये सर फीस और ये 3 आए हुए हैं आपके.
ओके ओके, थैंक यू. Okay, I am back. So, Richard Mollica, another expert, explained, when victims tell their stories, shame turns into dignity. Their stories move from humiliation to honor. The stories of the victims move from humiliation to honor. By speaking, they regain their sense of self and their place in the world. Therapists who help survivors of political torture found that writing, talking, and revising testimony is an essential part of recovery. Therapists who help survivors of political torture found that writing, talking, and revising testimony is an essential part of recovery. Forgetting doesn't help, facing the pain does. Forgetting pain does not help. Facing the pain helps. Facing the pain does help. What Chilean therapists discovered? A group of Chilean psychologists worked with torture victims. They said victims need to tell their story in full detail. They must describe what happened. They must express their emotions. The victims must express their emotions. This helps them organize their experiences into a coherent life story. It allows them to truly feel their losses. It allows them to truly feel their grief and rebuild their identity, their grief. It allows them to truly feel their losses, grieve, and rebuild their identity. In short, talking heals. Crying and remembering are part of recovery. Speaking makes people whole again, moving from past to future. When people face what happened and talk about it, they begin to see time differently. The trauma moves into the past, it no longer dominates the present. Once the story is told and understood, the survivor can start focusing on the future, from private pain to public truth. When victims realize their suffering wasn't just a private tragedy, it changes everything. When victims realize that suffering wasn't just a private tragedy, it changes everything. They start to see it as part of a bigger social evil, not just bad luck. This realization helps them move away from silence, move away from fear, and move away from shame. In oppressive societies, victims suffer twice. In oppressive societies, victims suffer twice. First, from the torture, from the abuse itself. Second, victims suffer from being disbelieved, or victims suffer from being silenced by others. In our society, many times victims are silenced, particularly victims of rape. They are silenced, or many times they are not believed. So it is the second suffering. When they finally speak in a setting like the TRC, and when they are believed, it heals that second wound. Keeping it inside makes the pain worse. Telling it out loud brings relief. A real example from South Africa. One man, blinded by an apartheid era police officer, nicknamed Rambo of the Peninsula, testified before the TRC. Uh, in fact, he lost his eyesight, due to the torture, due to oppression. One man, blinded by an apartheid era police officer, nicknamed Rambo of the Peninsula. It was his nickname. He testified before the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. After sharing his story, he was asked how he felt. He said, "What made me sick was that I couldn't tell my story. I couldn't tell my story, it made me sick. But now that I have told it here, I feel like I've got my sight back. But now that I've told it here, I've told my story here, how was I blinded? I feel like I've got my sight back." It's so important. This shows how telling one's truth can feel like regaining one's life. So it was the first part of this. It is a quite long journal article. So I think it should be sufficient to get an idea how Truth and Reconciliation Commissions work and what is their role and what is their significance in healing the society and the nations. So I close here. I join you back on Google Meet. I'm closing.